Before I begin this gripping tale, I urge you to subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to on the notification button to get notified when we drop new interesting stories. Now let's dive into today's story.
The dusty, sun-baked street hummed with the relentless energy of Lagos. The air was a thick soup of frying plantain, diesel fumes, and the vibrant chatter of 1,000 lives intersecting. In the midst of this controlled chaos, under the faded shade of a patched-up umbrella, Amaka worked. Her hands, calloused and nimble, danced a familiar rhythm over the old Singer sewing machine, its steady whirring a testament to her endurance. Fabric flowed under her guidance, transforming from mere cloth into school uniforms, flowing dresses, and sharp-fitting trousers. This roadside patch was her kingdom, her sewing machine her throne, and the beautiful, long hair she often braided intricately was her crown. At 38, the pride in her hair was one of the few vanities she allowed herself, a silken reminder of a youth that had been harder than most. On this particular afternoon, the heat was a physical weight. Amaka paused to wipe a bead of sweat from her temple, her eyes scanning the bustling crowd. Her heart, as it always did, beat a little faster around this time, waiting for her son. Damilola, her Dami, was her universe. The reason her tired hands kept moving, the source of the light in her weary eyes. Suddenly, she saw him not walking, but running. His long legs eating up the dusty ground. He was waving a white envelope above his head like a victory flag, his face split by a grin so wide it seemed to eclipse the sun. "Mama! Mama!" he shouted, skidding to a halt in front of her stall, his chest heaving. "It's here! The letter from the Lagos Academy of Excellence!" Amaka's heart leaped into her throat. She took the envelope with hands that suddenly felt clumsy, the official logo seeming to pulse with importance. For months, this had been their shared dream. Dami, with his brilliant mind that devoured textbooks like others, devoured jollof rice, had applied for a merit scholarship. The academy was a gateway to a future she could only imagine, a future far removed from the dust and struggle of this street. With trembling fingers, she slit the envelope open. Dami crowded close, his breath warm on her shoulder. They read the words together, their voices a hushed, disbelieving whisper. "Pleased to inform you. Awarded a 70% scholarship. Conditional upon payment of the remaining balance." For a glorious, breathless moment, pure joy erupted. Amaka pulled her son into a tight embrace, laughing and crying at once. "You see," she exclaimed, her voice thick with emotion. "You see, my son, I told you, your brain is your key. You will fly where my feet could never tread." They dreamed aloud, right there in the dust, Dami becoming a great engineer, a scientist, changing the world. The world for that afternoon was painted in gold, but nightfall brought a cold, stark reality. Sitting on the floor of their single room, a small generator sputtering outside providing meager light, they did the math. The 30% balance plus the mandatory uniforms, books, and boarding fees was a figure so large it felt like a physical blow. Amaka's small metal box of savings, filled with crumpled Naira notes collected over years, was a laughable fraction of what was needed. The following days were a blur of humiliating journeys. She visited uncles and aunties she hadn't seen in years, her pride tucked away like her best wrapper. The answers were variations of the same theme. "Times are hard, Amaka. My own children's school fees are choking me." Doors that had once been open to her were now politely but firmly closed. She even went to Dami's father's old family house, only to be told he had moved to Port Harcourt with his new wife. Each rejection was a stone added to the heavy load on her heart. One evening, she passed by the Lagos Academy. Through the tall iron gates, she saw students in crisp, clean uniforms playing on lush, green fields. She saw the modern buildings, the libraries full of books. She saw the future, and she saw her son there, his face eager and bright. Then she looked down at her own worn-out shoes, covered in the red dust of her struggle. The chasm between the two worlds seemed impossible to bridge. That night, as Dami slept soundly on his mat, his textbooks neatly stacked beside him, Amaka knelt beside him. She watched the steady rise and fall of his chest, his face peaceful in sleep, so full of untapped potential. A fierce, desperate love clenched in her chest. She would not let his dream die. She would not let the dust claim him. There had to be a way. And then she remembered. A few weeks earlier, while delivering a dress to a wealthy client on Victoria Island, she had passed a sleek, glass-fronted building. Prestige wigs and hair. We buy natural human hair. She had seen a woman inside, having her long hair evaluated, the buyer admiring its length and texture. An idea, terrifying and audacious, began to form. Her hands instinctively went to her own hair, braided neatly for the night. It was her glory, the one thing about herself that still felt beautiful. It had taken her years to grow it so long and strong. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and shameful. To sell it? To walk around bald like a plucked chicken? The thought was mortifying. But as she looked at her son, the tears dried, replaced by a steely resolve. What was beauty compared to his future? What was her pride compared to his promise? The next morning, she told Dami she had a special dress delivery to make on the island. She wore her best outfit, a simple but elegant Ankara dress she had made herself. She boarded the bus to Victoria Island, the journey a silent, anxious pilgrimage. The air-conditioned chill of the wig company was a shock to her system. The place was unnervingly quiet. A world away from the noisy warmth of her street. A woman with a sharp, assessing gaze approached. "Can I help you?" Amaka's voice was barely a whisper. I want to sell my hair." The process was cold, clinical. The woman examined her hair, unbraiding a section, feeling its texture, measuring its length. "Good quality," she said, her tone devoid of warmth. "We can offer you this amount." She named a figure on a calculator. It was, to the naira, exactly what was needed for Dami's fees, with a little left for a new scarf. Amaka's heart hammered against her ribs. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and nodded. She was led to a sterile chair. The stylist, a young girl who avoided her eyes in the mirror, gathered her long hair into a ponytail. Amaka kept her eyes shut tight, refusing to look. She thought of Dami's face when he received the news. She held on to that image. The sound was the worst part, a sharp, final snip. Then another. Then the strange, unsettling sensation of weightlessness. She felt the cold air on her neck and scalp, a feeling so alien it made her shiver. She heard the soft thud as her shorn hair was placed on the counter. She kept her eyes squeezed shut until the transaction was complete, the crisp notes counted into her hand. She didn't look back as she walked out, clutching the money and a profound sense of loss. At home, in the privacy of their small bathroom, she finally dared to look in the mirror. A stranger stared back. Her head was covered in soft, short fuzz, her scalp pale and vulnerable. A sob escaped her, raw and painful. She quickly wrapped her head in the most beautiful, brightly colored geli she owned, tying it with an artistry that hid everything. When Dami came home, he looked at her with surprise. "Mama, your hair, the new scarf. It's beautiful, but why?" She forced a bright smile, her heart aching. "It's just a new look, my son. And this weather is too hot for all those braids, don't you think?" He bought the lie, his mind already on the equations in his textbook. The next day, Amaka went to the school and paid the fees in full. On Dami's first day, she adjusted his brand new uniform, her eyes drinking in the sight of him. So handsome and full of hope. He hugged her tight. "Thank you, Mama, for everything. I will make you proud. I will change our story." He had no idea that she had already rewritten the first chapter with the most painful sacrifice of her life. As he walked away towards his new future, Amaka touched the scarf on her head, a silent, hidden monument to a love that would forever remain her secret. The years flowed like the brown water of the third mainland bridge, carrying with them the tides of change. The dusty roadside where Amaka's sewing machine once whirred was now a slightly less dusty roadside, but the rhythm of life remained largely the same for her. The vibrant gale scarf had become her permanent signature, a part of her identity as fixed as the calluses on her fingers. She wore them with a quiet dignity, though sometimes, on particularly humid nights, she would allow herself the private luxury of removing the wrap, running a hand over the short, coarse hair that had grown back, and remembering the weight of what was no longer there. Her son's photograph, now showing a young man in a graduation cap from the Lagos Academy, had replaced the hidden picture of her former self in the drawer. Damilola had not just flown, he had soared. His name was no longer just Dami. It was Damilola Adebayo, the tech prodigy. The full scholarship to MIT had been the first headline. The development of a revolutionary fintech app that simplified cross-border payments for everyday Nigerians had been the second. The sale of that startup for an amount with more zeros than Amaka could comprehend had made him a national sensation. Forbes, Africa's youngest billionaire. He called her every week without fail, his voice deeper now, still filled with the same boyish affection. He sent money, more money than she knew what to do with, but she continued to sew. The sewing machine was her anchor, a tangible link to the life that had forged the son she loved so fiercely. She lived simply, saving his gifts for a future she couldn't imagine, all while telling her neighbors, "My son is doing well, by God's grace." The news of his return started as a rumor, a whisper carried by the market women. Is it true? Is the big boy coming home? Then a formal call. "Mama!" Dami's voice crackled with excitement through the phone. "I'm coming home next week. There's something important I need to do." The entire neighborhood began to buzz with an electric anticipation. On the appointed day, the familiar street transformed. Women swept the red earth in front of their stalls with extra vigor. Children were dressed in their best clothes. Amaka, her heart a drumbeat of pride and nervousness, wore her finest Ankara wrapper and a new, exquisite gele, its folds perfect and regal. She tried to sit at her sewing machine, but her hands were too unsteady. The arrival was not with the quiet subtlety of a boy returning to his mother. It was a procession. A sleek black SUV, followed by a van with a satellite dish on top, navigated the narrow street, parting the sea of onlookers. When the car door opened, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Damilola stepped out. He was a man now, tall and confident, but the smile he offered the cheering crowd was the same genuine smile Amaka remembered. He wasn't dressed in a Western suit, but in a magnificent, impeccably tailored navy blue agbada, a proud declaration of his heritage. He shook hands, hugged old neighbors, accepted their blessings with a bowed head, but his eyes never stopped searching. And then they found her, standing by her sewing machine, under the same patched umbrella, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. He moved towards her, the crowd parting respectfully. The cameras, which had been a buzzing nuisance, suddenly stilled, sensing a moment too sacred to be disrupted by noise. Damilola did not simply hug her. He walked up to her, and in a gesture that spoke volumes of his upbringing, he went down on both knees, bowing his head before her. A reverent silence fell over the street. He then rose and wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight. "Mama," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "I am home, and it is all because of you." Tears streamed down Amaka's face, soaking into the expensive fabric of his agbada. She didn't care about the cameras. This was her son, the boy she had carried on her back, the young man she had starved for, the man now holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Later, inside their modest room, surrounded by the familiar smells of home, he held her hands and they talked. He spoke of America, of his work, but always circled back to his gratitude. He looked at her scarf, a question in his eyes. "Mama, you still wear this every day? Even inside? You know you don't have to hide from me." She patted his hand, her smile gentle but firm. "It is my style now, Dami. It is who I am." The secret, she believed, was still safely locked away in the past. After a while, Dami stood. "Mama, come outside. There is something I want to say to everyone, but mostly to you." Puzzled but trusting, Amaka allowed him to lead her to a chair that had been placed in a cleared area outside. The crowd and cameras reassembled, a hushed expectancy in the air. Damilola stood before them, not as a billionaire tech titan, but as a son of the soil. "My people," he began, his voice clear and strong. "You have known me since I was a boy running through these streets with holes in my shoes. You celebrate me today because of what you see on television, the money, the success. But the foundation of that success was not built in Boston or Silicon Valley. It was built right here." He gestured to the ground, to his mother's sewing machine. "It was built on the strength, the sacrifice, and the love of one woman, my mother, Amaka." He spoke of her sacrifices, the long nights she spent sewing under a kerosene lamp, the way she always claimed she wasn't hungry so he could have more food, her unwavering belief in his dreams. Amaka listened, her heart swelling with a love so profound it was almost painful. But then his tone shifted, becoming more intense, more personal. "But there is one sacrifice," he said, his voice dropping, "that I only discovered the full truth of recently. A sacrifice so deep, so personal, that she carried it alone for all these years, thinking it was a secret." Amaka's blood ran cold. Her hands flew to her gale. No, it wasn't possible. He couldn't know. Dami signaled to an assistant who brought forward a sleek, leather-bound suitcase. He placed it on a small table in front of his mother. "Mama," he said softly, "open it." With trembling fingers, she clicked the latches. Inside, nestled on velvet, were not stacks of money, but documents. He lifted them out. "These are the deeds to a new home, a bungalow with a garden, in a quiet place where you can hear the birds sing, not just the generators." The crowd erupted in cheers. He held up another set of papers, "And this is the business plan and ownership papers for a chain of 3 tailoring and fashion design studios. The first one is ready. It is called Amaka's Crown." The name struck her like a physical blow. Crown? Why that name? Dami then gently took her hands and helped her to her feet. "But the real surprise is this way, Mama." He led her, the entire community and media entourage following like a wedding procession, around the corner to a building that had been under renovation for weeks. It was a beautiful modern storefront with large glass windows. Above the door, in elegant gold lettering, was the name, Amaka's Crown Fashion and Design Institute. He unlocked the door and led her inside. The interior was breathtaking. State-of-the-art sewing machines, cutting tables, mannequins, and shelves filled with the most beautiful fabrics she had ever seen. It was a temple to her craft. But Dami led her to the main wall behind the reception counter. "This," he said, his voice choked with emotion, "is why I named it Amaka's Crown." There, enlarged and exquisitely framed, was the photograph from her drawer. The young Amaka, radiant and smiling, her face full of hope, her magnificent long hair flowing over her shoulders like a cascade of dark silk. "Mama Nkechi told me everything last year," Dami whispered, tears now freely streaming down his own face. "She told me how you came back from Victoria Island that day, your eyes red, and made her swear never to tell. You sold your crown, Mama, to buy my future. Today I am not just giving you a business, I am returning your crown." A sound half sob, half moan escaped Amaka's lips. The world seemed to slow down. The cameras, the gasps of the crowd, it all faded into a distant hum. Her hands, shaking uncontrollably, went to her head. Slowly, deliberately, she began to untie the gale. The silk fabric unwound, and as it fell away, she stood there, exposed yet more powerful than she had ever been. She didn't touch her short hair. Instead, she reached out and touched the glass over the photograph of her younger self, her fingers tracing the outline of that lost hair. Then she turned to her son, her face a canvas of overwhelming love, gratitude, and a lifetime of released pain. She pulled him into a crushing embrace, her body shaking with the force of her tears. Tears not of sadness, but of a healing so profound it felt like a rebirth. In that moment, the hidden sacrifice was finally honored, and the weight of a secret carried for 8 long years dissolved into the warm Lagos air, inspiring a nation with the simple, powerful truth that no act of true love is ever forgotten.